The Ministry of Finance Incorporated, MOFI, presented their budget before the Senate Committee on Housing. Present at the meeting was the CEO, MOFI, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Housing, and other senators.
The vice chairman of this committee, distinguished Senator Ume. In political parlance, we don't call him kingmaker. We call him governor's maker. Because he has produced so many governors and he's still producing. The Hamadike of the universe. My distinguished colleagues, the CEO of MOFI and your team, Secretariat, gentlemen of the press, a very good afternoon to you and welcome. We have the agenda before us, so we start with the opening prayer. And in the Senate, in National Assembly, we have our standard prayer, and it goes thus. Almighty God, ruler of heaven and earth, we beseech thee to inspire and guide all our counsels and actions, so that we may always walk in the path of justice, love, and charity to one another. Help us with thy grace to do only those things that will promote the unity, prosperity, and happiness of Nigeria. Amen. Thank you very much, Vice Chairman, my distinguished colleagues, the team from MOFI, Secretariat, and gentlemen of the press. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this crucial session of the Committee on Land, Housing, and Urban Development, convened as part of our ongoing 2025 budget review process. This meeting underscores our commitment to ensuring that the housing sector, a critical driver of national development, receives the strategic attention and funding it deserves. As you may know, this committee is charged with the responsibility of overseeing federal government activities in the housing and urban development sector. We deemed it necessary to hold this interactive session with the Ministry of Finance Incorporated due to its vital role as the statutory corporate entity that manages the federal government of Nigeria's corporate investments. Specifically, this committee seeks to understand MOFI's contributions to the housing sector, particularly as it relates to its oversight of government investments such as Federal Mortgage Bank, where the government holds 50% as equity stake, Family Homes Funds Limited, where the government owns 51% as equity stake, and any other related housing investments being managed by MOFI. We are keen to learn about the MOFI's role in these investments, including the nature of advice provided to the federal government on maximizing their impact and value. It is imperative that we have clear, concise, and transparent submissions from MOFI to guide our deliberations, enable us to make informed decisions, and prepare well-founded recommendations that will ultimately benefit the citizens of the Republic of Nigeria. To my colleagues on this committee, I commend your dedication to fulfilling our legislative responsibilities. Your expertise and commitment are essential as we review these proposals and ensure alignment with national priorities. In conclusion, I extend my sincere appreciation to the CEO of MOFI and your team for your commitment and dedication to this process. Your contributions are invaluable as we collectively work towards achieving the housing sector's objective for the 2025 fiscal year. Let us all engage constructively and particularly productively during today's session to ensure we deliver the best outcomes for the Nigerian people. Thank you, and may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you very much. While making my remarks, I believe two of our colleagues walked in, so I will invite Senator Nasiru to introduce himself, and then Senator Wabwezi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues.
Agenda at this point, we're on item 4, briefing by the representative of MOFI. So, Mr. Armstrong, you have the floor.
Thank you, distinguished Chairman, Your Excellency, the Vice Chairman. Of my colleagues, I'd like to thank you for the privilege and the invitation to share with you the mandate of MOFI, and then to also discuss the work we're doing in the housing sector, which I believe is something that is critical for this committee. Let me start by giving some background about MOFI, Ministry of Finance Incorporated. The Ministry of Finance Incorporated was started by an act of parliament that dates back to 1959, even before independence. And it was established for the sole purpose of ensuring that for all the federal government's investments and assets that are commercial in nature, MOFI would hold that on behalf of the federal government. It was on the back of that and the basis of that that most commercial enterprises that federal government established and had interest in terms of shareholding, that shareholding of federal government was held by MOFI, starting from the days of NITEL, Nigerian Shipping Lines, and then today the ones that are existing, NNPCL, after the PIA came into effect, the 50% that belongs to federal government is held by MOFI. The federal government shares in Bank of Industry are held by MOFI. The federal government shares in Federal Mortgage Bank are held by MOFI. Family Homes Funds, the 51% by federal government is held by MOFI, and many others as well. Prior to February 2023, MOFI was effectively a shelf company. In other words, when federal government needed to have a shareholder in any commercial enterprise and needed to present an entity to hold the shares, MOFI will be used as that entity to hold those shares. It never actually existed as an operating entity. And as part of the reform that the President Buhari had initiated, there was a general observation that, contrary to global best practice, if MOFI is holding those shares for assets or investments, there was also a responsibility to ensure that we are proactive in ensuring that those investments and assets are delivering value and dividends to Nigeria and to Nigerians. The same way that if any of us were to go and buy shares in any commercial enterprise as a shareholder, you would expect that every year that entity would deliver dividends to you as a shareholder. But that hasn't been the case, or wasn't the case, because most of those investments that were made and MOFI held shares on behalf of the federal government were not delivering value to federal government. In fact, there is one where for 30 years, not a single dime, not a single kobo was ever delivered in dividends to federal government. On the contrary, federal government's holding in that reduced in value. And needless to say that many other entities such as NITEL, Nigerian Shipping Lines, are no longer in existence. Clearly, that does not bode well for the country in the sense that a lot of the investments that were made lost value and became non-performing. And so in the part of the reform in 2023 was to restructure and reposition MOFI to become an active manager of those investments and assets. That way we are proactive in ensuring that those investments and assets are delivering value to Nigeria and to Nigerians. As part of that process, we engaged a number of experts to design a 10-year strategic plan for MOFI. And part of that strategic plan stated that we needed to ensure that this new entity had a corporate governance in place. In other words, there is a governing council that is chaired by the president with some ministers as members and 3 individuals as members of that governing council. Immediately below the governing council is the board of directors of MOFI that is currently chaired by Dr. Shamsuddin Usman, the former Minister of Finance and former Minister of National Planning. And then there is an executive team which I lead. That's one aspect in terms of governance. The second aspect of it was that for now, there are 3 key areas that we have been mandated to focus on. The first one is to ensure that we create an assets register so that we are aware of what federal government owns, how much it is worth, with a view to optimizing those assets. And that spans across different asset classes. corporate assets, of course, which are shares we own in commercial enterprises, lands, developed properties, solid minerals, oil and gas, intangible assets, are all part of that portfolio. So everything that federal government owns that is of economic and commercial value needs to be established. And why is that important? Today, most of the discussions we have concerning our economy, we always talk about how much we owe. Almost each and every one of us knows how much we owe, almost to the last kobo, who we owe, and when repayments are due. But very few of us can say authoritatively how much we own, where it is located, how much value it is delivering to Nigeria. And clearly, it means that we are losing a lot of financial and economic value from those assets and those investments. That is why one of our key objectives is to create this National Assets Register so that we all have visibility over what we own, how much it is worth, so that we can optimize it. The second part of our objective, Chairman and distinguished members of this committee, is to work with all our corporate entities. In other words, those companies where we own shares in. Chairman, you mentioned Federal Mortgage Bank, Family Homes Funds, Bank of Industry, Bank of Agriculture, Development Bank of Nigeria, the DISCOs. Those are all entities where federal government owns shares in. To work with them, to provide them with the support that they need to do better and deliver on their mandate. Currently, many of them are undercapitalized and they need to be recapitalized. A lot of them don't have the right kind of corporate governance that allows them to do well in comparison to their counterparts in the private sector. And so that's one major second part of it, to work with these corporate entities to support them so that they can do more and deliver more in the sectors for which they were set up to add value. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, distinguished senators. I was talking about the three areas of focus of MOFI. The second was working with corporate entities where we have shareholdings in to support them so that they can deliver value as well as the mandate for which they were established. And the third mandate, Chairman and distinguished members, is for MOFI would work with the government, the subnationals, as well as other international investment companies, as well as local investment companies like those in the capital market, to mobilize capital at scale to invest in priority sectors of the economy. And those areas that we have identified, those sectors that we consider to be very important, include housing. So what we call first things first. These are the fundamental things that every human being needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Housing, food in terms of agriculture, transportation, healthcare and infrastructure. So as part of that, Chairman and members, distinguished senators, with respect to what relates to your committee, we did a study of the housing sector over the last several decades and identified a number of things. One was clearly the fact that MOFI is a shareholder in two of those institutions that you referred to, Federal Mortgage Bank, Family Homes Funds. In fact, we're also shareholders in an MRC, which is the Mortgage Refinancing Company of Nigeria. And there were a couple of things that were very clear to us, which you are all aware of. But we looked at it from an investment perspective. The housing gap, which is over 20 million. But what is even more worrisome is the fact that we have less than 100,000 active mortgages within the entire sector. And if you do not have a mortgage scheme, it clearly means that you're not providing the financing structure for individuals to be able to own homes without having to pay for everything upfront. And that creates a lot of challenges for the entire sector. It makes it difficult for developers to feel confident enough to mobilize investments to develop houses without being sure that there will be off-takers. It also makes it difficult for even those that are in that sector, especially the mortgage institution, to write more mortgages. And we know from the work we do and our ownership in NMRC that there are not enough transactions for refinancing, which effectively creates a challenge for that institution that was set up specifically to raise money to refinance existing mortgages. And we identified a number of areas that we felt that as part of our mandate we can intervene in. One of those areas is leveraging on our status, our assets, and our position to raise financing at scale to inject into the sector. Financing from both public sector and private sector, so that we can make that liquidity available to that sector, especially on the demand side, providing low-cost mortgages, long-tenured, and at scale. That's one major objective for the MOFI Real Estate Investment Fund. The second aspect of it is on the supply side, to provide offtake guarantees to developers. So when developers want to invest in housing, or banks want to extend credit to developers, they are sure that there is a list of off-takers that are available because the mortgage financing is available. Those are two main objectives of the MOFI Real Estate Investment Fund. Where are we at the moment? We're able to get the necessary approvals that are required to establish that fund through the Securities and Exchange Commission. Because our financial system requires that if we're going to raise money from the public and other institutional investors, that fund needs to be approved by SEC. We've done that. And we established the fund, the initial part of it, for 250 billion naira out of 1 trillion naira. Because we strongly believe that as much as government is intervening and may want to intervene in the housing sector, government resources alone are not sufficient to address the challenges in the housing sector. We need to create policies and structures that will attract and crowd in capital from outside government, especially institutional investors, financial institutions, the capital market, as well as pension funds. It was on the basis of that that we established the MRIF, which is the MOFI Real Estate Investment Fund, as a platform that would leverage on federal government's resources and crowd in private sector funds, so that we have a larger pool of funds available for the sector, so we begin to address the challenges that we are facing, both on the demand side as well as the supply side. We've raised the first series for 150 billion. We are currently in the process of raising the next 100 billion from the private sector, so that the first set of mortgages will be written out of that 250 billion as part of the pilot. And the expectation is that the lessons learned from this would help us expand and widen the net of pool of funds that will be available for the housing sector through the MRIF. Distinguished Chairman and members of this committee, that's where we are on MRIF. It is our view that this intervention will help begin to address the issues that we are facing in the housing sector and thereby helping bridge that gap. Thank you very much, sirs.
My colleagues, you have listened to the presentation of the CEO, and we are clearly interested and concerned about managing the housing subsector or component in the activities of MOFI. And from my information and from what he has said, they have already having some funds warehoused, and progressively they are likely to access about 1 trillion naira that is going to be injected into the housing subsector of the economy. Am I right, Mr. Armstrong?
Yes, Your Excellency, you're right, sir.
That is by no means a small target, and is very, very important. And I assure you that members of this committee are willing and ready to partner with you in your team for us to succeed. However, my first observation before I yield the floor to my colleagues is on your role and that of Mr. Sani Akubu. Is there no conflict of roles? National coordinator. Okay, he is of MR.
He's the national coordinator for the program. I'm the CEO of MOFI.
Oh.
The company.
You have to break it down further.
Sure. So Finance Incorporated is the real estate investment fund. As the federal government manager of investments and assets. So we sponsored this program. But we also reckon.
He is the coordinator of the program.
That's right, Your Excellency. Yeah, so he's an ED who is responsible for the implementation and the execution of the program of MRIF. Yes, Your Excellency. That is correct, sir.
Agencies handling housing needs, and the agencies themselves have different cost structures. I want to believe that the MOFI may have a much more lower cost of fund than some of these other ones. Okay, the last time we went to family homes, you remember they said they were sourcing for a $20 million line or something. Okay, and I told them that look, there is foreign exchange risk in that. Okay, so if MOFI can provide whatever funds are needed by those specialized institutions, that their core function is to develop housing needs, I don't think there is a need for them to be directly involved. What they should do is to provide intervention funds, okay, to those agencies that their job is that of housing, meeting the housing needs of Nigerians, okay, so that we don't run into problem of who is controlling what. Then another area that, Mr. Chairman, I want us to look at is it that we don't have enough houses or the houses are not affordable? Okay? Is it that we don't have enough houses or that the houses are not available? All over the place, well over the place, whatever. There are so many houses and people cannot afford. Okay? People cannot afford. Okay? And those houses mainly, if you go to Lagos, the same thing, go to everywhere. The same thing. These houses are springing up every day. People cannot afford. Is there a way that MOFI, for example, can partner with some of these developers, pay them off, okay, take over the properties and then sell them to Nigerians, because they are Nigerians. Most of these developers got these monies from banks, okay, at cutthroat interest rates. Many of them are having problems today because they cannot pay the banks, okay. So why can't MOFI intervene, okay, by partnering with these developers and then take them off? Okay, so that they can get back their liquidity and move on to maybe new sites. That's why I'm asking the question that is it that we don't have enough houses or that the houses are not affordable? They are two different things. Thank you very much.
You own 50% of NNPC. Am I right? And no, he was to speak about NNPCL.
Distinguished Senator, you're right.
Right. I'm not aware.
By PIA.
No, I am not aware that there is any other shareholder other than the federal government of Nigeria in NNPCL.
All of us.
Who? He said only 50%. What about the balance 50%? Who owns them?
I will answer the question, sir.
Please.
Because I was looking at whether I will see your name as one of the directors.
Armstrong.
Okay. Is it Armstrong?
Yes.
No,
Senator, father was whose name?
because
Chairman's name.
what I could see here is advert. And all of us, we thought you wanted to defend the budget, including your number 2. I don't know, it's but you have to go through another channel. Now that you cannot present this one to appropriation, this one a back door. So, and my own problem now is when you have proliferation of all these interests into housing, only in Abuja, Lagos and Port Harcourt, where you have the bourgeois. In our own villages, these people cannot go and build houses because it's a project pro bono. If they can do that, we will kill villages in Igbo land, in Yoruba land, in Hausa land. On this note, Mr. Chairman, I'm not seeing anything that people like us to sit down and be considering since there's no budget there.
It says invitation to the 2025 review of MOFI's housing finance program and its impact on the expected deliverables from the 2025 housing budget and the housing sector during the fiscal year. By induction, Mr. Chairman, nothing here imputes or suggests that MOFI were invited for budget defense. They were invited to address a specific matter, and that's why they are here. That's yes. So that is the invitation from what I can discern from this document. So if we get that straight, it will inform the basis on which we are going to discuss with them. And as to, without holding brief, Senator Fadawansi, if they build these houses in Mesile, for instance, how many people will buy? Thank you very much, Chairman.
Clarification, Mr. Chairman.
CEO, please.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, Chairman.
Try to shed some light on the questions raised.
These stakeholder engagements are key in us delivering our mandate as MOFI, because MOFI is an entity and all the investments or assets that we're managing belong to Nigerians, and you are the representative of the people. So it is part of our duty to share what we're doing with you. So even if there is no other reason why we're here, we're glad that we're here to shed light on what we're doing that will contribute to yes. Specifically, the issue of the constitutional mandate, MOFI is established by an act of parliament, as I mentioned before, to hold federal government's interests in any commercial transaction. Given the fact that we have structured the MRIF as a platform where we are the sponsor, and it is a fund that is approved and regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, we are buying units of that fund in exchange for the money we are putting in. We would hold those units in our balance sheet as government's assets. And every time dividends are shared by virtue of us holding those shares, we will get those dividends like we will get dividends on any other investment that government makes. We own shares in Transcorp Hilton, for instance. It is a listed entity. When the dividends are declared, by virtue of our shareholding, we get those dividends sent to us by the fact that we own 11.04% of that share, of that entity. Same thing with MRIF. It is an entity that is registered and regulated by SEC. It will be registered on an exchange, either Nigerian Exchange or FMDQ. And as the fund managers manage the funds and dividends are distributed to investors in that fund, we will get our own. And what we're doing is that we're holding those shares on behalf of federal government. And our law allows us to do that like we would own shares in any other investment. The second point, sir, is about budget defense. As I mentioned, the letter we received spoke specifically about us talking about the sector and how we're contributing. That is why we focused on that. The other point was about harmonization of government agencies and the work that we do. We agree with you in its entirety. It is important that for this sector to progress, there is clarity of the roles and responsibilities of each agency, not only in terms of those in public sector, but even those in private sector. As I mentioned, MRIF does not in any way encroach or duplicate or conflict with the mandate of any existing institution that we're referring to. If we take Federal Mortgage Bank, for instance, MRIF does not conflict with the mandate or the role of Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria. In fact, we are shareholders in Federal Mortgage Bank. And part of the discussion we've been having generally is the need to recapitalize the entities that have such pivotal roles, and Federal Mortgage is one of those that is under consideration for recapitalization, because we strongly believe that there is a need to recapitalize it so it can better deliver on its mandate. And this does not in any way conflict. If anything, it helps provide more liquidity that Federal Mortgage Bank and other mortgage institutions can tap into to ensure that they extend mortgage credit to Nigerians. Family Homes Funds, again, is a portfolio company of MOFI, and this does not conflict in any way. In the case where there is a need for them to develop any project or any houses, they can apply to the MRIF like everyone else, get an offtake guarantee that would allow them to raise financing to go ahead and undertake the project that they want to, so long as it is deemed to be commercially viable. So long as the houses they are going to build are houses people can actually buy and they can pay back through the mortgage program, it will qualify for that. Federal Housing Authority, as we all know, has a mandate to deliver housing units in different parts of the country, and they are going to different state governments to obtain land, to initiate projects to develop houses. This does not conflict with that at all, because we in MOFI are not going to be building any houses. MRIF or MOFI will not be involved in building any houses, so we don't conflict with what they're doing. Neither are we going to take the role of Federal Mortgage Bank. MOFI will not, MRIF will not be building houses. Will not, and I want to make that very clear. So what we are doing does not conflict with what Federal Mortgage Bank is doing. It does not conflict with what Family Homes Funds is doing. Neither does it conflict with federal housing. On the contrary, by succeeding in this, we're providing liquidity in the sector that makes up of government financing crowding in private sector, because ultimately we want private sector to be heavily involved in the housing sector for us to deliver the number of units that we want. But for that to happen, we need structures like the MRIF to attract private sector capital, because there are requirements for private sector capital as well as other international investors to bring in their money into that sector. If you do not have the right structures, that money will not come. That is why the MRIF structure is absolutely critical. But when that money comes in, it is to the advantage of all of these players. And how will that work? If we continue to put money in building houses and we don't have people who can buy them, those houses will end up empty and will end up with a lot of ghost cities and ghost towns. And there are, if we want to be honest, there are many houses. I'm glad that Senator made the point. There are a lot of houses out there that have been built by different developers, but they are still empty. Why? Because there are people who have the desire to buy those houses, but they can't afford to pay a lump sum for it. So whatever it is that they can afford, they can use that as a down payment, 20% down payment, and the balance of it can be financed through this program. So by invariably increasing the number of people that can afford to buy these houses. So we believe that this program is fundamental in addressing the point that was made earlier, that there are estates where they've built those houses, but the developers can't get their money back because they are not buyers. So we believe that this is actually one solution to that problem. If we take Federal Mortgage Bank, for instance, Your Excellency and distinguished members, Federal Mortgage Bank has been around for quite some time. We all know that. But the fact remains that it is heavily undercapitalized, and even the number of houses that federal mortgage can finance on its own is a fraction of the need that the sector has. And so whatever solutions that we can bring in to expand the liquidity in that sector and enable more houses to be bought is even to their own advantage when to deliver their mandate. So our view is that this will help address some of those things that on the issue of houses that developers have developed and are out there, again, that's why a program like this is fundamental. Because ideally what should have happened is that before the project started, it would have been helpful to get a list of off-takers. The MRIF has a platform where developers can upload their houses even before they start to get the interest of buyers who have already qualified for the mortgage. So we already have buyers to be able to purchase that. So that speaks to the point about those developers. Ownership of NNPC by the Petroleum Industry Act, PIA. There were two shareholders that are recognized in that act. One is Ministry of Finance Incorporated, which represents federal government. The other is Ministry of Petroleum Incorporated, MOFI, which represents the balance 50%. That's the structure we have in PIA today. Please don't ask me.
Very defective. It's defective. Who represent the states? It means that you still own the shares of the Ministry of Petroleum. Don't worry. Who owns the Ministry of Petroleum? Who owns the
He asked me a question, sir. I just responded. I'm not taking responsibility for the actor. And I don't want to be hooked, sir. So in terms of the different agencies, again, from our perspective, we believe that the agencies that exist today, if they deliver on their mandate, will make significant progress in the sector. But if I may, this chairman and distinguished members, if I may add, sir, I believe that there is something that this committee can do, a couple of things this committee can do. From our interactions with investors, both in Nigeria and externally, they always raise the question of our mortgage foreclosure laws. That if they put their money in a real estate program that is meant for mortgages, and a buyer defaults, how quickly can we foreclose on that property so that they can get their money back? That law today needs to be worked on. And I believe that that is something that this distinguished committee can expedite. The second point I would like to raise, if I may, sirs, is the issue around the regulation within the sector. Every main sector of our economy has some form of a regulator. If you talk about telecommunications, it's NCC. If you talk about drugs and food, you have NAFDAC. And there are many other sectors as well. If you talk about oil and gas, there is a regulator for upstream and there's a regulator for the midstream and the downstream. We need something similar for the housing sector. I know there is going to be an issue, the chairman did raise that to me, which is around the Land Use Act, vesting the powers of ownership to state governments or subnationals. This proposal is by no means prejudicial to that act. On the contrary, it will set a framework where each of those subnationals can key into. And there's a precedent for that, distinguished senators. NERC, the Regulatory Commission. If, as you know, there is an existing law that gives states the powers to establish their own regulators. But it is mimicked after NERC. And those states can regulate electricity sector in their own states, and they can also go into ownership of the GenCos, the distributors, as well as even the transmission companies within their states. I believe that a similar thing can be applied in the real estate sector. I also believe that that regulation or that regulator can open up a vista of opportunities in that sector more than what we have today. The same way that the existence of NCC opened up the telecom space when it was put in place. We strongly believe that that is something that this committee can help drive to bring some element of that. And finally, Chairman and distinguished members of this distinguished committee, it's around having legislation that provides incentives for capital flow into the housing sector, not only for the demand side in terms of the mortgages, but also on the supply side. We cannot rely on developers borrowing money at 29, 30, 31% to build houses and expect the houses to still be cheap. In most jurisdictions, there is some element of intervention when it comes to financing for mortgages, because it is not just a financial transaction, it is a social responsibility of government to house its people. I started by saying that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, first things first, fundamental rights, housing, we have a responsibility to house our people. So it is important that government also proactively works with private sector as well as others to ensure that the houses are reasonably priced, and there are also financial instruments that allow people to own houses using long-term financing or mortgages that tally with their income base. We must have government proactively working with private sector to do that, rather than just leaving it solely in the hands of government or solely in the hands of private sector. And again, if a developer takes a project and takes 12 months to build it and borrows money at 30%, automatically that cost of funds will be built into the cost of that house. So there's nothing they can do about it. If he's going to do the project, he has to build it in. There are also issues around building materials. If we can find legislation or incentives that allow us to domesticate as much of the local building, the materials locally, it also reduces how much we are importing into the country. So, and these are areas that I believe that this distinguished committee can add value as far as this sector is concerned. Thank you very much.
Well, before CEO, you may need to brief this committee on whether you had actually had any budget defense before any committee of the Senate in the course of this 2025 appropriations exercise. And secondly, shed more light on your role in funding FHA, funding private investments, private developers, and what impact you are likely to make in reducing the cost of housing and issues around affordability going forward. Yes, federal government is targeting injecting 1 trillion through this program. What is the focus? How is it going to impact on affordability of housing in Nigeria?
Our budget defense, yes, we have. We're actually under the Senate Committee on Finance and also House Committee on Finance, which is where we do our defense. In fact, we actually had one of the defense sessions on Tuesday with the House Committee on Finance. And also under Ministry of Finance, the defense, we are part of the Ministry of Finance, so the defense in the Senate Committee on Finance. The second point around our role in funding FHA, in terms of we don't fund FHA as such. They have, by legislation, they have mechanisms by which they get funded. We don't fund them. In terms of private developers, again, we don't fund them directly. Like I said, what we try and avoid is direct involvement in a lot of these activities. But the way MRIF would work to help both FHA as well as private developers is FHA, for instance. If FHA goes and says we're raising money to develop X number of units of houses, if they're going to build a number of houses, then it also makes their project more bankable and more attractive if there are off-takers that have a source of mortgages to buy those houses. So our view is that this program is actually beneficial to them, because the more houses we build and we cannot find people to buy them, it's a disincentive for either government or anybody else to be putting money in building more houses. How is our work going to be beneficial to private developers? One is, as I mentioned, the MRIF has two components, which is on the demand side, providing the mortgages, low costs, long-term, and at scale. The way it helps developers is that private developers, if they know there is a list of off-takers who have already been pre-qualified for mortgages. It makes their projects more bankable. It's an incentive for them to go ahead and build these houses, knowing fully well that when the houses are built, there are buyers. Otherwise, we'll end up with a lot of those properties where they are stuck with houses in their hands and there's no one to buy. So our view is that this is key. But Chairman, to your point about how does it reduce cost, automatically when you reduce the interest that people pay for mortgages, which we are targeting 12%, versus 30% today for commercial loans, that's a significant reduction in how much it costs to own a home through a mortgage program.
Thank you, Armstrong Takang. I listened to you very well from the beginning. And I'm happy that I've had the missing words over time. This MOFI Real Estate Investment Fund, I've looked at what you said about your operations, even though you are at the formative stages now. But it is obvious that you are there now with this MOFI Real Estate Investment Fund to help in the creation of housing stock in Nigeria, which makes it a welcome development. I'm an estate surveyor and valuer, therefore I'm a professional in the built environment, in the housing sector. And from what you have said, the funds which you are putting together to be able to assist in housing delivery, you collaborate with stakeholders like pension fund administrators. When we had PENCON people before us in another committee, I had wondered that the assets available to PENCON, over 21 trillion naira, and these are the funds they invest, they place through this pension fund administrators to different sectors. And you have now said you are also harvesting that fund from the PFS, and federal government is giving you, they've given you first tranche of 150 billion, 31, 32 is 100 billion on the way, plus other things you are doing to raise fund. My question is how you intend to discharge this function which you are taking up by yourselves at this stage, because government has set up a lot of platforms to create housing stock to the Nigerian people. Federal Housing Authority, the Federal Mortgage Bank is responsible for creating affordable housing through funding, through mortgage arrangements. And you know that all over the world, let me not say all over the world, all over the civilized world, America, UK, you cannot talk about housing without mortgage. If you want to own any house, the first thing is for you to qualify to access mortgage facilities. So we have Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria here, and MOFI has been incorporated since 1959. That housing sector is still suffering till today. Nigeria is suffering from under provision of housing stock. Do you not think that it is better that these funds that you are putting together are channeled to those institutions that are doing this housing delivery directly under arrangement of subsidized interests than the way it is being conceived now, investing in stocks, investing in shares of companies that go into real estate development? Federal Mortgage Bank is poorly capitalized, and they have appeared before us in this committee. They don't have money. And then you have 150 billion, and 100 billion will now come, that will make it 250 billion, and maybe government will target to give you 1 trillion. And the primary institution that will be in charge of delivering this mortgage finances has no money. Can't you put the money in the Federal Mortgage Bank and make it a very great institution that will now, people can now go to, have mortgage arrangements and build their own houses? So this is my question, because this MOFI Real Estate Investment Fund is an arm of MOFI, and you are the shareholding unit of the federal government. Anything government wants to invest money into, the shares are taken over by you. Can't you concentrate on those things so that this money will be put in the real places we need them? Federal Housing Authority is looking for money. They have now started looking for money to build houses across the states of the Federation, 200 houses per state, and they have no money to do that. Do they come under your own purview to give them funds? Because what Nigerians want is simple, just to see these houses across the length and breadth of the country. Instead of our building sales of investment funds here, and without being available to the people who need these houses and the actual government agencies charged with this responsibility. This is my question. Thank you.
Instead of putting it as question, I can turn it as advice. You see, when you started, some of us or members asked questions that they are expecting budget defense from you. And I said, well, program of the year is also budget. What's lacking is figures. You're welcome. I want to advise, please. Most of us here have lived abroad. We own houses there. And some of us did not pay off. Please, hold on. Daura, I'm coming to you. We'll meet Buhari, your brother. Most of us here who own houses there didn't pay outrightly. Few of us paid outrightly. At least I refinanced the one I paid for and used for something here, and I'm paying gradually, but it's house I've owned. You can see how the thing works. You own a house, you can refinance it and start paying again and use the money for something else. While we're having empty or while we're having good cities here and there, developed places, but nobody is residing there, is because of high cost of the units. Now, what I want to advise, you people should help Nigerians to come out of their difficulties they are existing in. Collaborate with FHA and the Federal Mortgage Bank. You people should fashion out how people can buy houses and live in it. How they will own houses without paying outrightly. One, you know, if you are living in America, you get a job, you can get house immediately. Eh? Yes, yes. You can own house immediately. You get a pay job, and you can even furnish it. So if you want to help Nigeria now in this housing sector, with the existing people, come together with them, and what we should be giving us here now is the ratio, how people can own the houses, the percentage they will be paying annually, and so on and so forth, what qualifies them to own the houses, and they go on with that. And that will help us better. Otherwise, we will be forming different units, repeating ourselves, doing the same thing. It will never be effective. We have a professor of war here. That's why we don't want war to break out. He's a professor of war. That's why when an engineer is talking, he's talking. So I thank you. That's my own advice to you.
Personally consider making amendment to the Act, because there are lots of conflicting and converging complexities here, and my colleagues have distilled them. So there's no point for me to go into it. I go to plenary, and then we'll probably prepare a bill to amend.
Thank you. Attempt to answer these questions raised. As soon as they leave, we'll go into a closed session for 5 minutes, and then we'll close it. Please, go ahead.
Distinguished Senator, the governor's maker, as is known, a real estate professional, and the kingmaker, let me speak to very briefly about the point that you raised. You're quite right that there is an urgent need to take steps to increase the housing stock. There is no doubt about that, and we couldn't agree with you more. And that's why, as you know, in every business, supply is a function of demand. And so if the demand is low because people can't afford it, or they don't have means to get mortgages, then of course it would affect the willingness for people to increase the housing stock. So that's why we believe that this addresses that issue of housing stock. The second point you made, sir, is around PFAs and pension. You're also quite right. The pension fund has been growing significantly. But the law establishing PENCOM and the administration of those funds is very clear as to the conditions to draw from those funds. You have to create instruments that are in accordance with the regulations that have been laid down for the PFAs to invest into it. An example, for us to even get them to invest in this, there are a couple of things we must do. We would have done a risk management proposition that if they are going to invest, what type of risk are there and what are the mitigants? In this case, if we want them to invest in an instrument where the rate of payment is 12%, that is below their own repayments. So the part of government is to de-risk it by providing the money that would be at a subordinated interest rate. That's how you can get a blended rate that is below MPR. That is the reason, that's the only way they can invest in it, because they cannot take pensioners' money and give at the rate that is below MPR. That is one. The second is also a governance structure. The governance structure has to be where it is very clear that there is a fund manager who is licensed by SEC that will be managing that fund. None of the government agencies that we're talking about is a fund manager licensed by SEC to manage money that the pension funds will put their money into. The other aspect of it is that the actual exit and the entry and the exits have to be well defined. The fund has to be rated by one of the credit agencies, credit rating, whether it's GCR or Augusto and Co. to be rated. All of those things, those conditions have to be met for them to put the money into the fund. And it's the same thing for other international investors as well. They want to see that structure. And that's why even us in government are subscribers to the fund that is standing outside. But with the view that ultimately once the fund is successful, it helps in the delivering of the responsibility of government, which is to provide housing for our people. And then finally, the issue around helping Nigerians own houses. Clearly, we've been engaging all of these institutions that you're talking about. And like I mentioned, this does not in any way prevent them from delivering on their mandate. If anything, it helps them deliver on their mandate. Whether it is Federal Housing Authority, like I mentioned, we cannot be building houses where you cannot find buyers. It doesn't make any sense. And so the provision of MRIF to provide mortgages makes the building of those houses even more attractive, to the extent where they should be able to raise money from other investors to build more houses because there are buyers for it. So we're providing the demand for the houses that they will be building. If we talk about Federal Mortgage Bank, it's the same thing. Federal Mortgage Bank can also access these funds like any other mortgage bank to write mortgages for the people that come to them.
Thank you.
As far as you are concerned, what we're doing actually helps what they are supposed to do, and we're collaborating with them. We've engaged all of them, and we continue to engage them to make sure that together we're successful to deliver on the housing sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, MD. We'll allow you to go for now. If need be, because of time, we will have to have a special session, either retreat or whatever, on your role in housing subsector. Thank you very much. We are going into closed session, so please. We are going to closed session.